The world before the war had already been through so much. After the First Great War ended in 1918, people had hoped that peace would last. Countries were tired, cities were broken, and families had suffered. But even with peace on paper, the world was uneasy. Some countries had lost too much. Others were angry, humiliated, or left to deal with poverty and fear. These feelings didn't fade. They grew quietly, like a storm far away that no one could quite see but everyone could somehow feel. In Germany, life after World War I was hard. The Treaty of Versailles had punished them harshly, forcing them to pay debts they couldn't afford and accept full blame for the war. Many Germans felt this was unfair. Their economy collapsed, money lost its value, and jobs disappeared. People were hungry, angry, confused. It was during this difficult time that Adolf Hitler, a man with strong words and dangerous promises, rose to power. He promised to make Germany great again. To restore its pride. To find someone to blame. At the same time, in Italy, Benito Mussolini had already taken power and dreamed of reviving the old Roman Empire. In Japan, leaders believed they needed more land and resources to survive and grow. These countries began to build armies. They began to speak in terms of expansion, power, and destiny. The world was still healing from the last war, but already, new wounds were opening. By 1939, Hitler had broken promises. He had already taken Austria. Then he moved into Czechoslovakia. Other European countries grew nervous. Britain and France tried to avoid war. They hoped that giving him what he wanted would make him stop. But Hitler didn't stop. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. At first, the United States stayed out. Americans remembered the pain of World War I. They didn't want to send their sons to die on foreign soil again. President Franklin D. Roosevelt watched carefully but kept the country neutral. Still, the U.S. sent help to Britain and other allies, offering supplies, weapons, and ships. Meanwhile, the war in Europe grew more intense. Germany used a new style of warfare called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. It was fast, brutal, and effective. Country after country fell. Norway, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, France. Hitler's forces were strong, organized, and determined. By 1940, much of Europe was under Nazi control. In the East, the Soviet Union had signed a secret deal with Germany. They split Poland between them. But this peace didn't last. In 1941, Hitler turned on the Soviet Union and launched a massive invasion. It was the largest military operation in history. Cities were bombed. Millions died. Yet, the Soviets refused to give up. In the Pacific, Japan was also at war. They had already invaded China years before and were expanding quickly across Asia. Their military was aggressive, capturing land and resources. They wanted to become the strongest power in the East. But the U.S. stood in their way. America had placed limits on Japan, freezing assets and cutting off supplies. This angered Japan. Then, on December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, a U.S. naval base in Hawaii. The goal was to cripple the U.S. fleet and give Japan free rein in the Pacific. The attack was sudden, deadly, and destructive. Battleships sank. Planes burned. Over 2,000 Americans died. The very next day, the United States declared war on Japan. A few days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S. Now, America was fully in the war. Factories in the U.S. began to work day and night. Planes, tanks, bullets, and uniforms were made at record speed. Men joined the army. Women joined the workforce. Posters encouraged everyone to help. Victory gardens were planted. Rubber, metal, and cloth were collected. The entire country moved as one. American soldiers, known as GIs, trained and shipped out. Some went to Europe. Others to the Pacific. They fought in harsh places, deserts, mountains, jungles, and freezing forests. Many never came back. Those who did carried memories that never left them. In North Africa, American and British forces fought to push back German troops. Then they moved into Italy, inching their way up through cities and hills. In the east, the Soviets were pushing back the Germans, but at a terrible cost. Cities like Stalingrad became graveyards. Yet, the tide was turning. In 1944, the Allies planned something big. It was called D-Day. On June 6, thousands of soldiers crossed the English Channel and landed on the beaches of Normandy, France. It was the largest seaborne invasion in history. The fighting was brutal. Sand turned red. Bodies lay still in the surf. But the Allies held the beaches. They pushed inland. Slowly, they began to take Europe back. Back home, the news traveled by radio. Families gathered in living rooms, listening for updates. They followed the war with maps pinned to walls. They marked towns with thumbtacks. They prayed for sons, brothers, and husbands. By 1945, Germany was falling. Cities were bombed into ruins. The Soviets reached Berlin from the east. The Americans and British came from the west. Hitler, hiding in a bunker, took his own life. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. In the streets of New York, London, and Paris, people danced, cried, and cheered. The war in Europe was over, but the Pacific War still raged. The war in Europe had ended, but peace had not yet come. Far across the ocean, in the blue waters and green islands of the Pacific, the fighting still burned. Japan, though weakened, refused to surrender. Their soldiers were fiercely loyal, their commanders unyielding, and their islands well defended. For American troops, every step forward meant more danger, more blood, more loss. The war in the Pacific was different. It wasn't fought in the same way as Europe. There were no long rows of trenches or rolling fields. Instead, it was fought from island to island, each one a battle, each one a fortress. The names of these places would become etched in the memories of a generation: Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. These were not just battles. They were long, grueling tests of endurance and courage. At Iwo Jima, the beaches were black with volcanic sand. The Japanese defenders were hidden in tunnels and caves. American Marines landed under heavy fire. They advanced inch by inch. The famous photo of the flag being raised on Mount Suribachi became a symbol of hope and strength. But the cost was high. Thousands of lives were lost for a small strip of land. Okinawa was even worse. It was the last major island before Japan itself. It was supposed to be a stepping stone, but it turned into one of the bloodiest battles of the entire war. Rain poured, mud clung to boots. And the ground shook with constant explosions. Kamikaze pilots, flying their planes directly into ships, added to the terror. By the end, over 100,000 Japanese soldiers and tens of thousands of civilians had died. American losses were also staggering. The battle had taken months, and the world saw just how costly an invasion of Japan would be. Back in Washington, President Roosevelt had died in April 1945. His death was a blow to the American people. He had led them through the Depression and through most of the war. His calm voice and steady hand were gone. Vice President Harry South Truman took his place. He had only been in office a short time and now faced the most difficult decision of the war. For years, American scientists had been working in secret on a powerful weapon. It was called the Manhattan Project. Deep in labs across the country, they were building the world's first atomic bomb. The science was complex, the power unimaginable. By the summer of 1945, the bomb was ready. Truman was told that an invasion of Japan could cost over 1 million American lives. Japan had shown no signs of surrender. Cities had been bombed. Industry destroyed. Yet the Japanese government remained defiant. With a heavy heart, Truman made his choice. On August 6, 1945, an American bomber named Enola Gay flew over the city of Hiroshima. At 8:15 a.m., it dropped the first atomic bomb. The explosion lit up the sky. A massive mushroom cloud rose. The city was leveled. Tens of thousands died instantly. Many more would die later from burns and radiation. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The destruction was just as terrible. 6 days later, on August 15, Japan announced its surrender. The war was over. Across the United States, church bells rang. Strangers hugged in the streets. Soldiers wept. Families held photographs of loved ones who would never return. For the first time in years, people could imagine peace, but the world had changed. The war had left behind shattered cities, broken families, and millions of graves. It had cost over 70 million lives around the world. It had shown the heights of courage and the depths of cruelty. From the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were murdered, to the brutal fighting in Asia, the war revealed the darkest corners of human nature. In Europe, concentration camps were liberated. The images shocked the world: bones piled like logs, starving survivors with hollow eyes, families torn apart by hate. Trials were held. Nazi leaders were judged in Nuremberg. Some were hanged. Others imprisoned. The world tried to make sense of what had happened. In the United States, soldiers came home to parades and banners. They carried scars, some on their skin, others buried deep. The GI Bill helped many return to school or buy homes. New neighborhoods grew. Baby cries echoed down suburban streets. It was the beginning of a new era. Women, who had worked in factories and offices during the war, were told to return home. Some did. Others didn't want to. They had found strength and freedom and would remember it. Black Americans had served bravely in the war but returned to segregation and injustice. Their service planted seeds of change. They had fought for freedom overseas. Now, they would begin to fight for it at home. In Japan, the emperor spoke to his people on the radio for the first time. His voice was calm, sorrowful. The country was in ruins. Cities flattened. Families lost. But they began to rebuild. With American help. Japan wrote a new constitution, renounced war, and turned toward peace. Germany was divided. The East controlled by the Soviet Union, the West by the Allies. Tensions grew between former friends. Soon, a Cold War would begin, a war not of guns but of fear, spies, and silence. The world had entered a new age, but for a little while, there was quiet. People planted gardens again. Children played without fear. The sound of sirens faded. The flags that had been at half-mast were slowly raised. And though the scars remained, the world began to heal. The memory of World War II would not fade. It lived in the silence of fathers who never spoke of what they saw. It lived in the folded flags given to mothers and wives. It lived in textbooks, in films, in granite walls etched with names, and in the end, it lived in the hope that such a war would never happen again. Please subscribe our channel. Thank you, Americans.